Before England lifted trophies, before white ball revolutions and fearless declarations, something far more important had to be built first: steel. Nasser Hussain's legacy is not defined by silverware alone.
Top shot. Hussain at his best through the covers, and the first boundary of the English innings.
But by the mental transformation he forced upon English cricket at a time when belief was fragile and standards were negotiable. When Hussain took charge, England did not lack talent, it lacked hardness, accountability, and clarity. Losing had become familiar, excuses had become normal, and pressure was something the team absorbed rather than imposed. Hussain changed that culture brick by brick. He demanded discipline when comfort was easier, confrontation when silence was safer, and responsibility when blame had become routine. His leadership was not designed to please, but to prepare. What followed was not instant glory, but something more enduring: resilience. This story is about how England learned to compete before it learned to win, and why true success often begins long before medals are lifted or eras are celebrated. Nasser Hussain inherited one of the most fragile England teams of the modern era. Results were inconsistent, confidence was brittle, and defeats were often accepted with resignation rather than resistance. English cricket had talent spread across the dressing room, but it lacked unity, direction, and most importantly, belief under pressure. When Hussain became captain, his task was not to create champions overnight, but to rebuild the psychological foundations of a struggling side. He understood that without mental strength, technical skill meant very little at the highest level. Hussain's leadership style was uncompromising. He believed that clarity was kinder than comfort, and that honesty, even when harsh, was essential for growth. Training standards were raised, accountability was enforced, and players were expected to take ownership of their roles. Mistakes were addressed directly, not hidden behind diplomacy. This approach did not always make him popular, but it established authority and purpose in a team that had long drifted without either. As a batsman, Hussain embodied the values he demanded. His technique was disciplined, his temperament resilient, and his willingness to absorb pressure set an example for those around him. He batted time, he fought for sessions, and he understood that survival itself could be a weapon. Under his captaincy, England began to compete harder, last longer, and show resistance even in defeat. The significance of Hussain's era lies not in immediate trophies, but in structural change. He created an environment where effort was non-negotiable and excuses were unacceptable. This period became the foundation upon which future success was built. Before England could dream of dominance, they had to relearn how to endure, and Nasser Hussain was the architect of that transformation. The change began quietly, almost unnoticed from the outside. England did not suddenly start winning series or dominating opponents, but something fundamental shifted in how the team carried itself. Under Nasser Hussain, small habits were questioned, routines were challenged, and long-accepted weaknesses were no longer tolerated. Training sessions became sharper, standards became clearer. Players began to sense that simply wearing the England shirt was no longer enough. Hussain behaved differently from previous leaders. He did not soften messages to protect comfort, and he did not hide frustration behind politeness. When standards slipped, he addressed it immediately. When effort dropped, he reacted decisively. This directness felt unusual in an environment that had often relied on tradition and quiet authority. Some players were unsettled, unsure how to respond to a captain who demanded emotional investment as much as technical skill. On the field, England's body language started to change. They appealed harder, chased longer, and resisted collapse with greater intent. Even in losing positions, there was a visible refusal to drift. Hussain's own presence at the crease reflected this shift. He occupied time, absorbed pressure, and treated survival as a form of control. It was not glamorous cricket, but it was purposeful. Observers began to notice that England were harder to play against even when they were outmatched. Matches extended deeper into days, sessions became more contested, defeats felt narrower, more contested, and less inevitable. This behavior was not accidental. It was the result of a captain who believed that toughness could be taught through repetition and expectation. What made this phase unusual was that the transformation focused on attitude before outcome. Hussain was not chasing quick success. He was building resistance, knowing that without steel, silverware would always remain out of reach. As England's behavior changed, confusion followed. Commentators, supporters, and even former players struggled to understand why results still lagged behind effort. The team fought harder, showed more discipline, and competed longer, yet victories remained scarce. Questions emerged about whether Nasser Hussain's methods were too strict, too demanding, or simply out of step with the modern game. Some believed that his relentless focus on toughness was limiting freedom rather than unlocking potential. Inside the dressing room, the pressure was constant. Players were forced to confront uncomfortable truths about their preparation and performance. There was little room to hide behind reputation or past achievement. Every failure was examined, every lapse questioned. For some, this environment was overwhelming. For others, it became a catalyst for growth. The divide created tension, and that tension spilled into public debate. Critics searched for simpler explanations. They pointed to selection decisions, tactical conservatism, or a lack of natural flair. Others argued that England needed inspiration, not discipline. But none of these explanations fully accounted for what was happening. Hussain was not ignoring talent. He was attempting to protect it by creating structure. He understood that flair without resilience collapsed under pressure, especially against the strongest sides. The confusion deepened when individual performances began to improve without immediate team success. Batsmen stayed longer at the crease, bowlers held lines more consistently, fielding intensity increased. These were signs of progress, but they did not translate into headlines. To many observers, it felt like effort without reward, and that raised doubts about the direction England was taking. What most failed to recognize was the scale of the damage Hussain had inherited. Years of underperformance had weakened belief. Repairing that damage required patience and persistence. The team was learning how to endure before learning how to win, and endurance rarely earns quick praise. Despite criticism and uncertainty, one fixation never changed for Nasser Hussain. He remained relentlessly focused on mental strength, not tactics, not reputation, not public approval. His belief was simple and unshakable. England would not succeed until they could survive pressure without fracturing. This fixation became the defining tension of his captaincy. While others searched for shortcuts, Hussain returned again and again to the same principle, even when it cost him popularity. Every decision seemed to orbit this single idea. Selection favored reliability over flair. Discipline outweighed instinct. Players were judged less on highlights and more on how they responded when things went wrong. Hussain demanded presence in difficult moments, not brilliance in easy ones. This approach created friction because it ran counter to what fans often wanted to see. Spectacle was sacrificed for control, and patience replaced risk. The problem was that this fixation produced slow, uncomfortable progress. There were no dramatic turnarounds, no sudden victories to justify the pain. Losses still came, sometimes harshly, and critics argued that England were becoming rigid, even predictable. Hussain heard the noise, but he did not move. To him, abandoning the process would mean returning to fragility, and fragility was the true enemy. Internally, this created enormous pressure. Players knew that excuses would not be accepted. Mental lapses were treated as seriously as technical ones. A soft dismissal or a careless session carried consequences. Over time, this relentless expectation began to reshape habits. Players started to value time, patience, and resistance. They learned that survival was not passive, but an active skill. This fixation was suspenseful because its success could not be measured immediately. It demanded faith in something invisible. Hussain was gambling his reputation on the belief that steel must come before success, even if he would never personally benefit from the rewards. The first clear sign that Nasser Hussain's approach was working did not arrive as a trophy or a famous series win. It appeared in moments that were easy to overlook but impossible to dismiss for those watching closely. England began to fight in situations where collapse once felt inevitable. They saved matches. They stretched contests. They forced stronger teams to work harder for dominance. These moments were subtle, but they carried weight. One of the earliest clues was how England responded after setbacks. Wickets no longer triggered panic. Early breakthroughs by opponents did not immediately unravel the innings. Batsmen regrouped, slowed the game down, and rebuilt with intent. Bowlers returned to plans instead of drifting into frustration. This collective response was new, and it reflected a shift in mindset rather than talent. Hussain's own performances reinforced this change. He played innings that prioritized time over runs, resistance over rhythm. These knocks did not always look impressive on scorecards, but they changed the tempo of matches. They showed teammates that absorbing pressure could exhaust opponents just as effectively as attacking them. Slowly, this lesson spread through the side. Another clue emerged in how England competed overseas. Conditions that once exposed weakness now revealed growing adaptability. The team did not dominate, but it endured. Sessions were fought evenly. Mistakes were reduced. Discipline held longer. These were not coincidences. They were evidence that the internal standards Hussain enforced were taking root. Perhaps the strongest signal came from the dressing room itself. Younger players began to accept accountability as normal rather than threatening. Preparation improved. Conversations became more honest. The culture was changing, even if the scoreboard lagged behind. This was the turning point many failed to recognize. The success Hussain was building was not immediate or visible, but it was real. The first clue was not a win, it was resilience, and that resilience would later become England's most valuable asset. The truth behind Nasser Hussain's captaincy only became clear with time. His era was never meant to be judged by immediate success because his real achievement was invisible in the moment. The big reveal was that Hussain was not building a winning team for himself. He was rebuilding English cricket's identity from the inside out. What looked like stubbornness was actually long-term vision. What felt like harsh leadership was structural repair. England's problems had never been purely technical. They were cultural. For years, the team had crumbled under pressure, accepted defeat too easily, and relied on isolated talent instead of collective strength. Hussain identified this flaw early and chose to confront it directly. His captaincy became a controlled demolition of comfort. He removed excuses, stripped away softness, and forced the team to confront its weaknesses head-on. The reveal became clearer when his tenure ended. The players who followed carried something different into future battles. They were harder to break. They understood the value of discipline. They no longer feared long sessions or difficult conditions. Michael Vaughan's successful Ashes side did not emerge from nowhere. It was built on the mental groundwork laid before trophies arrived. Hussain's influence extended beyond tactics and selection. He normalized accountability. He proved that leadership was not about being liked, but about being trusted to do what was necessary. Many of the habits England later celebrated were born in an era that was criticized for lacking joy. The joy came later. This was the truth most missed at the time. Hussain did not fail because he did not lift silverware. He succeeded because he created steel. By the time England were ready ready to win, they already knew how to suffer, how to wait, and how to endure. That knowledge was his legacy. Nasser Hussain's story ends without the usual images of lifted trophies or victory parades, but its importance runs deeper than medals. His captaincy reminds us that true transformation often happens quietly, without applause, and long before results confirm its value. Hussain accepted responsibility at a time when England needed repair more than celebration. He chose to confront weakness rather than disguise it, knowing that honesty would be painful but necessary. The lesson from his era is clear and uncompromising. Success that arrives without foundation is fragile. Confidence without discipline collapses under pressure. Hussain proved that before a team can win consistently, it must learn how to lose properly, fight relentlessly, and endure discomfort without breaking. These qualities cannot be improvised in moments of crisis. They must be built patiently, day after day, expectation after expectation. His leadership also teaches that progress is not always visible to outsiders. Cultural change happens internally through habits, standards, and accountability. Hussain's England did not always look joyful, but it became resilient. That resilience later became the backbone of England's resurgence. In the end, Nasser Hussain built steel before silverware. He accepted criticism so others could inherit strength. His legacy is not a trophy cabinet, but a mindset that allowed future teams to believe they belonged at the highest level. That is leadership measured not by applause, but by impact.